And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stuart Johnston. I'm the president of CIMA, the Canadian Independent Music Association. And for those who don't know, CIMA represents over 300 small businesses from coast to coast, such as independent labels, managers, publishers, recording studios, and others in the ecosystem. CIMA's team and board of directors are working hard every day to make sure that our governments are aware of your needs during this time of crisis, and that the right support measures are put in place. In fact, just this morning, the Prime Minister clearly heard the industry and announced changes to the $2,000 a month subsidy, saying that royalties will not be counted as revenues for eligibility for artists, and that you can still earn up to $1,000 per month and still be eligible. And CIMA continues to program today's type of informative webinars to help the industry in new and different ways as we navigate this new normal. And we cannot do it without partners such as Unison. I want to sincerely thank the Unison Benevolent Fund for its partnership on today's event, and of course for its ongoing and extraordinary support and services that Unison provides to our industry. CIMA and Unison are pleased to present today's mental health in music town hall discussion. In these trying times when social distancing and self-isolation are the new norms, taking care of our mental health is more important than ever. Now, before we introduce our moderator and guest speaker, I will hand the reins over to Sarah Hagerman at Unison to say a few words. Sarah?
Thank you, Stuart. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah. I'm the Industry and Events Manager at Unison Benevolent Fund. So the Unison Benevolent Fund is an assistance program created and administered for the music community by the music community, designed to provide discreet relief to the music industry professionals in times of crisis. There are two distinct types of support available through the fund, which is our emergency financial assistance and our counseling and health solutions, which is supported by our BC Foundation. Please learn about our services and how they can help you at unisonfund.ca. So now more than ever, Unison's emergency relief assistance is a critical safety net for members of our industry who are deeply affected by the COVID-19 virus itself and the precautions and protocols surrounding it. So please help us as we prepare to support the most vulnerable during this time by making a donation to Unison. Right now, for every donation made at unisonfund.ca/donations/Spotify, Spotify will match your donation dollar for dollar up to a collective of a total of $10 million USD. This is an incredible opportunity to support those who are in need of our emergency financial assistance program. So again, that's unisonfund.ca/donations/Spotify, and that's a perfect tool to donate. For counseling inquiries to help you deal with the financial or emotional impact of COVID-19, please visit our website and learn about our free counseling program. For emergency financial assistance inquiries, please know that Unison will carefully review your circumstance and request within the context of finding the best way to assist you during this very difficult time. Please be reminded that our resources are limited, dependent on the generosity of our donors, and are allocated in ways to best support as many individuals as possible, of course. Thank you so much to CIMA and CAMH for presenting this much needed event and for supporting Unison and our music community. And a quick note as well from the CAMH website for this webinar. The effort to address COVID-19 is both extremely important for us and poses a range of challenges for individuals and families as they respond to the demands of the situation. It's important to acknowledge that the situation is stressful for everybody, and it's normal to feel anxious or worried. This conversation is designed to provide information and suggestions about how to best cope with this difficult time. It is not intended to be a resource for people who require screening for COVID-19 or experiencing a mental health crisis. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact 911 immediately or present to your nearest emergency department. Thank you so much, and back to CIMA.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker and moderator today. And we're very fortunate to have Dr. David Goldbloom with us. David Goldbloom completed an honors degree majoring in government at Harvard University, and then attended the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, where he obtained an MA in physiological sciences. He trained in medicine and psychiatry at McGill and is a professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto. He has authored numerous scientific articles and book chapters and has provided talks and lectures to student, professional, and public audiences. He is the editor of 2 textbooks in psychiatry and co-author with Dr. Pierre Bryden of the best-selling book, How Can I Help? A Week in My Life as a Psychiatrist. He maintains an active clinical and teaching role at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, where he serves as senior medical advisor. And our moderator today is Catherine MacLellan, who is one of Canadian folk music's true gems. The acclaim for her work is significant, with numerous awards, including a 2020 Juno nomination for her latest release, Coyote, in the Contemporary Folk Album of the Year category. This is the same award she took home in 2015 for her standout album, The Raven Sun. In 2017, Catherine completed an album, If It's All Right With You, the songs of Gene MacLellan, in tribute to her songwriting father, as well as a stage show and a documentary that has shone a light on his life, success, and struggles with mental health. Catherine has become an advocate for reducing the stigma associated with mental illness and has been able to talk to this subject on a local, national, and international level, speaking at wellness events and appearing on such shows as CBC's The Sunday Edition and Q. Now, I hear that Catherine's just released a new song and video this morning called This Storm. So I hope you all get a chance to listen to it after this webinar. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Dr. Goldbloom and Catherine MacLellan.
Hello, everybody.
Hi there. Thank you for the introduction, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I think it's really nice to be here talking about mental health as it relates to not only the COVID-19 crisis that we're all in, but also as a music industry, musicians and everybody else in the industry. So do you want to talk a bit, Dr. Goldbloom, about why it is important to be talking about this? Start off with bang.
Look, we don't need a pandemic to be talking about how important mental health is, even if the pandemic shines a certain light on it. But I've had the good fortune to speak to numerous groups of artists of different stripes: theater artists, music artists, other creative professionals, about the importance of mental health and challenging some of the romantic images of what the linkage is between mental illness and creativity. But that's probably a talk for another day, because right now, all of us, every citizen in this country, is living under the reality of a profound change in the way we lead our daily lives and a threat from a virus to which no one is completely immune. And so that is a collective experience of fear that produces an anxiety that's actually quite normal. I have to say right off the top that the people I sort of worry about are some of the idiots congregating on the beach in Florida rather than the people sheltering in their homes, in terms of what's really abnormal here. And so I want to make the point that anxiety is a normal human experience until it reaches that point that it becomes really crippling and devastating. But I think it's actually a great reflection on how the discussion has shifted in Canada, and thanks to advocates such as yourself, Catherine, around bringing this conversation more out into the open. Because if this pandemic had happened 10 years ago, I think the focus would have been much more exclusively on our physical health and well-being than our mental health and well-being. And so we need to, I think, all of us, be cognizant of the fact that the abrupt change in how we lead our daily lives, how we gather food, how we have enough money to buy food, how we pay our rent, and how we connect with others has been profoundly disrupted. And there are going to be consequences for us in terms of our mental health, despite the fact that many of us we'll also find wells and pockets of resilience that we didn't even know we had.
Mhm.
And that includes in people with pre-existing mental illness, as well as people who don't have a mental illness.
I think it's, you know, it's interesting. I've been thinking about it a lot. How actually, in some ways, the music industry might be a bit more resilient because so many of us are already used to financial instability and irregular schedules, and you know, even being at home for long periods of time, working at home. So many people are working from home now. But I think that there's a real sense of grief that needs to be acknowledged. You know, a lot of musicians and all the people that work with musicians, managers, agents, have lost a good chunk of their livelihood. I know for myself, I've lost tours going into the end of summer now, and there's a you know, there's the fear of not being able to make it through financially. Then there's the anxiety of, you know, all of us, you know, what is going to happen next. But there's just a grief also. I wonder if you could speak to that. Like, how do we acknowledge that as a real thing?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that it is a real thing and it is a collective thing, right? This is not a unique loss to any individual. I'm very involved with the community at the Stratford Festival, where the season has been put on ice, and 1,000 people affiliated with the Stratford Festival find themselves suddenly and precipitously out of work. And there is the emotional impact as well as the financial and practical impact. And when we think about sort of collective grief, if you want to call it that, one of the things that gets us through that is our sense of connectedness and community. And you know, it's very unfortunate that the government has used the term social distance, because the correct term is actually physical distance.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have physical distance, what you need is social proximity, not social distance. And in fact, the irony is social distance is a term that was actually coined to describe stigma and discrimination, which is how close would you want to get to somebody, for instance, who has a mental illness? One of the ways we measure that is social distance. So physical distance forces us to connect with others in ways, and listen, mercifully, we're in a digital age where you and I, even though we've never met in person, have had a number of conversations over the course of the last week, whether by email or on Zoom, that have allowed us to create elements of a sense of being connected to each other. And so now more than ever, that's important. And it's also important that it not be simply attending a talk, which is a very passive experience, but actually connecting, finding common cause. And, you know, if you think about grief and collective grief, the best example of that is a funeral. That's collective grief. Well, what do we do at funerals? We gather as a group, we have wakes, we have celebrations, we memorialize, and we also dig in our own pockets a little to honor somebody who has passed. So this is an important time for Canadians who can be generous to be generous. And generosity comes in a whole slew of ways. And at the very time when you're feeling pinched financially, you say, hello, this is actually the worst time for me to be asked for a donation. Well, donations should hurt a little bit, but they don't have to be just about money. There's so many ways, and I think of artists in particular, who can share the gift of their talent in a way that both brings comfort to others, but also, frankly, keeps those artists in mind. Last night, I was supporting a theater group in Toronto that phoned me every half hour for 3 hours with a 10-minute play over the telephone. And in 2 of them, I actually had a script. I had to be a participant in the play. So there's a good example of creativity triumphing over adversity while also raising money for the theater.
That's amazing. What an amazing experience that must have been.
That was great.
So I think I'm definitely seeing that people more and more are, creating these little networks, and like I've never had so many. I never used Zoom until a few weeks ago, and it's been an incredible way to connect with people. And like you said, more and more artists and creative people in general are kind of doing live streams, and they're posting monologues and putting up art that they've been making. A lot of people are baking.
Yes.
Do you think that there's also a chance here for us to pause? And I know that there's been a lot of talk about being overproductive, and not really sitting with what's happening. I don't know if you want to talk to that.
Yeah, I think there are 2 extremes. One of them is people who feel kind of paralyzed by this experience, and they're watching CNN 24 hours a day because there's always breaking news on CNN. Even if it's yesterday's news, it's pitched to you as breaking news, and it creates a certain urgency that makes people feel, well, they've got to put the rest of their lives on hold and focus on news developments. And then there are other people who say, well, I've got to make a list as long as my arm of things that I need to do, which then actually kind of sets you up for failure, because sometimes these lists are ridiculous in terms of what you can expect to accomplish in a 24-hour cycle. One of the antidotes to that is, it's not particularly profound, but it is about making a schedule for yourself. And importantly, a schedule that includes downtime, because the natural tendency is to fill a schedule with tasks, things you've got to get done. And nowhere in that is there time for fresh air, or time for meditation, or time for exercise, or ensuring that you're getting enough sleep. So finding that balance is important between paralysis and hyperactivity.
Yeah, definitely. I've been going, it's a bit of a roller coaster for me on that. There's been some days that have been utter, stay in bed and watch Netflix all day. And then other days where I can't stop working. And even just before this webinar started, I think it was Stuart from CIMA that mentioned he's finding it really hard to shut down. Like if you work at an office 9 to 5, it's easy to leave your work at work. But now with so many people working from home, do you have any tips for it? Is it just, making a schedule for yourself, or do you have any things that might be helpful?
Yeah, it's finding the off button on your smartphone, because we already had a problem before the pandemic of the bleeding of work into home life.
Yeah.
And the expectation that you were kind of omni-available to your work by virtue of being shackled to it by digital technology. And some forward-thinking companies, and I'm not talking about the music industry, have done stuff like actually shut their server down in the evening so that you couldn't send email through your work address as a way of discouraging people. I know when I was at the Mental Health Commission of Canada for a number of years, we would have email-free days where nobody at the commission was allowed to email because people were emailing each other from adjacent carols. We said, no, you know what? Go talk to each other. And people found that without the tyranny of email, they were getting a whole lot more work done, because email isn't work. Email is an interruption from actual work. I would think that musicians in particular know the value of solitude and they know the value of lack of distraction in terms of focus. And I know this mostly from my classical musician friends. If they're practicing 6 or 8 hours a day, it's with the technology off. And so I think, and this takes us back to the schedule around dosing yourself. Rather than leaving the TV on mute with CNN in the background or CBC News World on the background, schedule a time when you're going to check in on the news. And trust me, you don't need to know everything that's happening as it's happening. You check in once or twice a day, you will be current. But is your phone on and at your bedside when you go to sleep? You take one last look before you try to close your eyes. We know these are really bad habits for people to get into. So in your schedule, decide the time after which you're not responding to emails and find some other way to kind of gear down in the evening. Frankly, for me, it can mean sitting at my piano for an hour before I go to sleep and tuning out the rest of the world.
Mm. Yeah, that's really important. And you're right, this was a problem before this pandemic was upon us. And I think in a way for me, it's been a gift to have all of this time to think about it. And in the first week when I was home, I was checking the news every 5 minutes and social media and seeing what people were saying because it felt so urgent and the crisis was upon us. And now as time is spreading out a bit, I think it's a great time to pare down our news consumption and our social media consumption and try to find space for creativity and for reading. I can't wait to finish a book.
Well, and look, it feels terrible in the midst of a pandemic to talk about anything positive that emerges from the restrictions that have been placed upon us, because, all of us have felt a financial hit from the impact of the pandemic, or suddenly we're running a daycare center in our homes that is a nonstop event. But inevitably, there are some things that do emerge that are positive. First of all, we know from evidence on other national disasters, I think it's fair to call this a national disaster, that there is an emergence of collective resilience, spirit, and generosity that can sometimes emerge out of the context of all of this tragedy, that actually brings us closer together, that actually has been associated with a decrease in suicide rates. So there are some good things, but you feel kind of sheepish or ashamed about acknowledging them.
Yeah, it's hard because there's so many people who are really struggling, people who are apart from their loved ones, and you don't want to turn that into a positive thing. But I think we can't just focus on the negative things either, because we won't make it through to the other side. There are a bunch of questions from folks through registration,
Sure.
and I think we've covered some of them already. So because some of them are similar, so I've lumped them together. One of the questions is, I don't know if you can answer it, but is isolation worse than the loss of finances? And that I don't know if that's a question any one person can answer for the rest of everybody, but I know for me, actually, I don't think that I like both of them. I like to have my finances in good order, and I like to be around people. But so I don't know which is worse, but I think people are just struggling to see how everybody else is doing.
Well, I remind you of the great words of Billie Holiday. She said, "Honey, I've been rich and I've been poor, and trust me, rich is better." And she was right. I mean, look, there's nobody who says, I put my hand up to take less money, please. Count me in. All right. But there is, again, this collective sense that we're not alone, any one of us, in having suffered financial losses. By contrast, I guess my point is there's nobody who likes taking a hit financially. By contrast, our individual capacities to tolerate isolation varies widely from person to person. So you can't make a generalization about which is worse, isolation or financial difficulty, because your ability to tolerate isolation depends on the person. I know one person who is, I would say, mildly antisocial, very comfortable in his own skin, who said that, self-isolating was a dream come true for him, to have this kind of imposed on him so he didn't have to bother with people so much. But for others, who have a relentless need to connect, it's a real challenge. And in the main, humans are very social animals. This goes against our grain. So it forces us to connect. I was watching the videos of the Toronto Symphony, the Rotterdam Philharmonic, and the Israel Philharmonic, all making music together from their homes, all of them with their earpieces in place, playing symphonic works. And it was actually moving and touching to watch these musicians, so skilled, showing their craft together and inspiring others. And as I said earlier, I think for a musician, one of the things you want to be is top of mind in your audience. So it's a great way to remind people of your skill, your craft, your creativity, while also giving people something.
Yeah, it feels like a very generous time right now. Lots of people are creating new music, new pieces, and sharing them with fervor.
Yeah.
I think there are a bunch of arts administrators and managers on the line today. And so one question, I think you've already kind of touched on it with scheduling, but how can we best support the mental health of our staff and artists during this time of distance, uncertainty, cancellations, and lost income? And I know I'm based in Prince Edward Island, and our music industry association here, I think they were very wise in they still have staff on that are working, but just reducing the hours that they're working in a day, because for one, when you're working from home, you're a lot less distracted. You can get more done in a short period of time. And for two, I think it's just to put too much pressure on your staff or your artists if you're, pressuring them to make new Christmas records or something. It's important to just ease a little bit. But do you have any insight into that from an organizational standpoint?
Well, I think organizationally, what you want to do, and look, I see this within my own hospital. My own hospital is reaching out to our staff, and we have about 3,000 staff at our hospital, reaching out to them on a very regular basis. Communication is critical, but also saying, look, we have resources for you. We have resources here to address the mental health and well-being of our staff. And even if you're working remotely, we want to feel connected to you. And, just talking for a moment about resources, I want to extend this offer to everybody who's on this call. Well, frankly, to everybody in Canada. Anybody who has access to a computer can go to the website of our hospital, which is www.camh.ca. And immediately you will be on the screen with mental health resources for the public around COVID-19 and how to cope So it provides you with tips, with coping strategies, with resources, with information about how to support yourself, but also how to support your loved ones, self-assessment tools so you can gauge your own level of stress and anxiety and know where you are, but also just answering basic questions like, where do I get reliable information? How do I talk to my kids about COVID? How do I support a loved one who's extremely anxious about COVID? Because even in one household, you're going to have one person who's scared shitless and another person who's sort of as well, if it happens, it happens. And so there's a huge range of human anxiety around COVID. But how do I deal with feeling lonely while I'm in self-isolation? Right? All of those things are addressed on the website. So it's kind of one-stop shopping for people to get high quality information about COVID. And all these organizations, large and small, are to some extent families. So think about it in that context. What do you do to help people in your family? And you stay connected, but you don't make it just one-way speech or information in an email. People need to talk to you and you need to talk to them. So how can you make that happen?
Yeah, I think listening is an excellent tool right now for within families and organizations. It's everybody, you said it, everybody is kind of on a different part of the spectrum as far as what they need in this time. And so listening, I think, is just so important. And asking.
And Catherine, if I can raise one other area, I don't think it has necessarily come up as a question, but I was triggered to think about it by a survey that came out this morning, a survey of 1,000 Canadians that looks at alcohol during COVID. And look, artists of a whole variety of genres, whether it's music or theater or writing or other creative artists, are a little more vulnerable than the population at large to getting into trouble with alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it might be worth just making a comment about this, because the data that came out a couple of hours ago on the impact of COVID on people's drinking behavior shows that 25% of Canadians aged 35 to 54 have increased the amount of alcohol that they are consuming at home since COVID took place. And about a fifth of younger Canadians aged 18 to 34 are drinking more since COVID hit us. And by contrast, people who are over the age of 54, people like, me, are only about 10% of us are drinking more than usual. So this is skewing to young adults and early middle-aged people. And what are the reasons people are drinking more, up to a quarter of them? Well, the biggest ones are a change in their routine or their schedule, boredom, and stress. And what's interesting is that cannabis has not gone up the way alcohol has. So the big problem here is alcohol. And given the vulnerability of artists in relation to alcohol, I think it's time for people to take a look at their drinking behavior while they are under relative lockdown to make sure it is not getting out of hand. Right?
Yeah.
And being actually more mindful and conscious of how much you're drinking, probably committing to a couple of days per week of no alcohol at all, just to remind yourself what a day without a drink is like. As you know, the liquor stores were declared essential services. Now, some people might question that, although the risk of people going into alcohol withdrawal is a significant medical risk. But that's a small percentage of the population, much smaller than the 25% of Canadians who admit they're drinking more during the pandemic. And I just want people to be mindful of that because they may not be thinking about it, realizing that they've actually increased their intake.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tricky when you're at home all the time with not as much to do and if you haven't maintained any sort of schedule.
Right. And remember that alcohol can increase your risk factors for getting sick from COVID, not from physical distance issues, but if it affects your immune system in a negative way, or if it exacerbates coexisting medical problems, which it can, they actually leave you more vulnerable to COVID, the very thing you're trying to avoid. So
Right.
keep that in mind.
And it's also a depressant, though it might, feel like it's easing your anxiety. It's actually increasing your depression.
Absolutely.
So it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I've had my struggles in the past with it, and it is not. It's not an easy road to get off of. So I know for myself, a lot of the things that I do to kind of anytime, but especially now I've been much more disciplined, is having a regular routine of exercise and meditation. So almost every morning I start the day, or at least after coffee, I start the day with some yoga and then meditation. And as the days get nicer and nicer, going out for a walk is a great option.
Well, look, Catherine, I'm very much like you. I try to kind of bookend my day. So the good news is there's all kinds of workout apps freely available. So our living room is now a beehive of workout activity first thing in the morning, just to get my heart pumped and feel in the mood to then have to sit at my desk and see patients virtually. And then at the end of the day, like a 10,000 step walk outside to get fresh air and to kind of clear my head of thoughts, maybe listen to some great music. It makes everything between those much more manageable.
Yeah. The days are tricky. They can either go very fast or very slow, but having that kind of consistency is, I think, really important. It has been for me.
Yeah.
I think people, there's been a few more questions. One was tips on staying creative and inspired, and does creativity help your mental health? I think tips on being creative and inspired is one pressure we don't really need to put on ourselves. I think there's, for me, creativity has been really helpful in this time. It's just given me a chance to actually work on things that I wouldn't normally work on. So I've been playing piano again. It's nice as a musician to play music just for fun.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Which is, I think, why most of us started. But yeah, how is creativity something that you would talk to your patients about as far as a tool to be used?
Well, it's a tool only if you were, before COVID, a creative person, right? We know that most people are not especially creative, certainly in relation to artists of all stripes, right? And there are many things that underlie that kind of special creativity that artists enjoy. And that's not to suggest that it isn't hard work, but it can be also a different way of experiencing the environment around you, your capacity as artists to notice things that other people don't notice, or to remove yourself from the external world to dwell in your own creativity. As a good example, I was reading a reflection by Glenn Gould about when he was studying a piece by Mozart in the late 1950s, right at the beginning of his career. And somebody turned on a vacuum cleaner while he was practicing this piece. And the vacuum cleaner was so loud, he couldn't actually hear what he was playing. So he switched to the inner piano in his head and heard the piano inside his head and the sounds that it was making, and discovered he actually preferred that way of being creative with Mozart, and subsequently turn on other appliances so that he could actually remove himself from that external world, even the external world of his keyboard, to listen to the keyboard in
That's
his
amazing. I think that my family might get very upset if I turned on the blender and the vacuum while I was playing.
head.
I have one note from Workman Arts in Toronto.
Sure.
Are you aware of them?
Workman Arts is affiliated with the hospital where I work, and it is an amazing organization that's been around for more than a quarter century to celebrate and demonstrate the artistic capabilities of people who've experienced mental illness or substance abuse or both. And they provide a tremendous service not only to the people who participate, but in fact to audiences across Toronto who flock to their events, whether it's music or art exhibits or the annual Rendezvous with Madness Film Festival. It's an amazing organization.
Yeah, they actually, I was a part of their Rendezvous with Madness when they screened my film. So they are amazing. And you just said all of the things that I was going to say. That's basically just how they support
And we haven't
artists.
even rehearsed.
I know, we're getting into the groove as we have about 10 minutes left. So this is good. I guess, one thing that was right off the top that I meant to ask you was, when should people, I spend most of my time kind of self-diagnosing myself or just trying to help myself from home, and I only reach out when things get really difficult. When would you say somebody should reach out to beyond their own little circle and actually seek professional help?
That's a great question. And I would try to caution people against consulting Dr. Google too frequently, because Dr. Google has the capacity to scare the hell out of you in terms of what's going on. And it's totally okay to see a professional if you're in doubt, if you're not sure what's going on with you. Nobody, speaking as a health professional, nobody expects patients to arrive with a diagnosis and say, by the way, I just thought I should let you know that I'm suffering from the following illnesses. No, they come in with things that are bugging them. And our job is to try to put the pieces together and see if we can figure out, understand, support, reassure, help, and provide hope. And so if you're in doubt, that's a really reasonable time to bounce that off a healthcare provider. And a lot of family docs I know have switched over to virtual practice and are seeing their patients that way. And of course, mental health concerns lend themselves to virtual care better than just about any other type of health problem. So you shouldn't be shy if you're in doubt.
And sorry, my brain just stopped.
But look, and let me add, Catherine,
Yeah.
you know, it's part of our job as healthcare providers to be able to say to people sometimes, no, you're okay,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You're not
Good to hear.
disappointing us if it turns out you don't have an illness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Part of it's actually a relief for us and hopefully a relief for you if we're in a position to say, you know what, you're good, you're okay.
And how can people who don't have, like a lot of people don't have family doctors and don't have an existing relationship with a therapist or psychiatrist, how would somebody go about finding help?
Okay, so there's a number of ways to do that. And in every province, there are branches of the Canadian Mental Health Association. And all of them will have on their website information about how to access help if you're looking for mental health help. We don't have a national 411 yet for mental health, although we should, to help direct people to resources. But sometimes it'll be a friend who has gotten help, who can tell you where to look. And frankly, even being able to share that conversation with a friend is helpful because when you experience symptoms related to your mental health, it can itself be an isolating experience, regardless of a pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, because it's associated often with feeling ashamed or embarrassed, or that you're somehow going to be judged by other people negatively, or that people are going to say, what on earth have you got to complain about?
Yeah.
And all of those act as barriers to getting available health. There's a wide array of people who provide mental health services: psychologists, social workers, counselors, peer support workers, spiritual clergy people, and there's also support groups that exist. You know, groups like AA and NA have moved online very quickly, and there are other support groups that are starting up online to help people as well.
That's amazing. That's great. I think, yeah, as you said, stigma is often the greatest barrier to people getting help. I do think that that's another place that maybe the music industry is a little bit lucky in that everybody thinks we're crazy anyway. So we can just go get the help that we need. I
Yeah.
say that in jest. I don't use that word usually, but I'm really so grateful. I think we're running out of time. We have just a couple minutes left. Is there anything that you feel like you wanted to share that you haven't had a chance yet?
No, I'm sort of more eager to be able to respond to the issues that your audience raises. I will say that, I think musicians have actually been quite outspoken in recent years on problems related to mental health. And whenever that happens, whether it's musicians or athletes, it has a permissive effect for conversation by the rest of us, because we see your gifts, we see your successes, we labor under the false belief that we somehow know you because you have a public persona, even though we really don't know you at all. And so for the rest of us, it allows us to think, well, if that person can talk about it, and if that person can continue to function and display their skills, maybe it's okay for me to talk about it. Maybe it's okay for me to get some help. So, hats off to those musicians who've been as outspoken as you have.
Thank you. It's good to hear that. It's so wonderful to get to talk with you. And I know. Oh, there was just a random question, Joanne. Yes, I did. live in Burlington, Ontario. I think that this collaboration between CIMA, Unison, and CAMH is really amazing, and I know that they're going to try and do more things like this, and I can't wait. And I do know that Sam said that this is going to be available online later once he's edited the video together. So I just want to say a big thank you to you, Dr. Goldbloom, for being here with us and sharing your thoughts and experience. It means a lot. And to Sarah at Unison, Sam and Stuart at CIMA, and everybody at CAMH. I mean, it's just, we are very lucky to have such amazing people supporting all of us right now. I feel very grateful.
Well, Catherine, it was a great pleasure to meet you. I suspect the Rhodes Scholar you would have rather had on was Chris Christopherson, but in any case, I was happy to be a part of this, and I wish everybody well in every dimension of their lives.
Thank you so much. We will see you all again somewhere soon.
Great.
Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.